Yo, we are back. Today is a special day. In 2016, when I was wanting to figure out how to get better at CrossFit and how to improve my engine, I had Chris Hinshaw and I tried to absorb all the information he had posted on the internet. And in the year 2026, it's even better. You have Mark Cullen. He's here today. He coaches some of the highest level athletes in our sport. Emma Lawson, Dallin Pepper, I know probably a few more. And we're gonna go nice and deep into developing your engine and just the endurance side of CrossFit and why it's so important. And Mark, you're an endurance coach. You came from like a triathlon background, Ironman background. If you could just give like a few sentences about kind of what you do before you got into the CrossFit space, because you're relatively newer to the CrossFit space, at least to my estimation.
Yeah, you got it. So pretty much grew up competitive hockey, soccer player, picked up endurance sports when I finished university, got a kinesiology degree, and have just ever since then nerded out hard about all things endurance. So I've been reading articles, listening to podcasts, doing all the things for many years. And yeah, I got my start initially in working with runners and triathletes. So these days, mostly competitive to professional level. And then it was just over the last, about 2 years where I started working with actually Emma Lawson and Jack Farlow. We're living in the same area where I was, and we're looking for some help on their endurance side of things with CrossFit having more endurance specific events and just people seeing the benefits down the whole stream in terms of having their endurance in a good spot. So that kind of got my start. People had some aha moments when they saw Emma go from mid to back of the pack in running events to up front with Amy Kringle. And then it kind of all snowballed from there to everyone being like, we need this really bad. So here we are today.
We do need this really bad. And I'm like one of the, like my strengths and weaknesses, like individually as an athlete when I started, 8-10 years ago, was very unique in terms of like, I had the strength for the most part, I had the skills, and it was the endurance side of it that I was just had a gaping hole. And there's still a lot of athletes out there that are like that. And there's a lot of athletes out there that simply just need to get a better engine. And there still is this huge disconnect in our space with the correct way or the most efficient way to develop your engine. And that's partially because there's a lot of coaches that we'll talk about more later that just still abide to the CrossFit methodology through and through, and that harder is always better. And we're going to talk about that. And I made a lot of progress from getting information of people who have very similar beliefs to you. And I would have been half the athlete I was today if I didn't implement some of these things we're going to talk about. So the first thing I want to talk about is, I guess, the 5-zone model of prescribing intensity. And you went to college, and I learned about aerobic progressions in college and how to determine or analyze or think about intensity. And the 5-zone model, that's what I feel like everyone in our space uses. It's like zone 2, zone 3, zone 4, zone 5. And especially at the lower thresholds, it's like the zone 2 is like the hot one. But I just want to hear your take on, how do you think about intensity, and kind of, is that the model you think about when you're thinking about intensity and where athletes need to get better? What goes through your head in terms of prescription of intensity? And what model do you use?
Oh, man, we can go deep on this one for sure. So I would say, like, when I'm talking with my athletes, I do use the 5-zone model just because I think there is some like important sections to delineate between like zone 1 being like recovery, zone 2 being a little bit more of that aerobic stuff, and then zone 3, 4 up to 5. And why I don't use maybe the 3-zone model that is just like LT1 and LT2, first and second threshold, is like the 3-zone model, is I think it can get a little too simplified there. That being said, like, I'm always thinking about, I'm trying to improve those LT1 and LT2 numbers as much as possible. So those are like big pieces in my head, but I want an athlete when they're day in, day out to know the difference between if they're working in zone 3 versus zone 4. So I think it's important to have those pieces in there, but really, like, how I think about intensity is, it's just these different intensity levels are just essentially a vehicle to help what I call build like the biggest triangle of fitness possible. So many CrossFit athletes who come to me have these, what I would call like tall, skinny triangles, in terms of they've like done all this top end type of stuff, but they have no foundation under it that supports it. And they wonder why they just continue to do all this top end stuff. like working harder, and then they wonder why they don't get better and eventually just get injured because they haven't invested in any of the time to go do any of that stuff below. If you think of like a 5K, an elite 5K runner, there's a reason these guys run 100 miles a week, even though they're only doing a 12 or 13-minute event, because there's so much to having that base in there that allows them to fully adapt and get that ceiling even higher. So I think any athlete building the biggest triangle possible is the most important things. And to do that, you need to touch across the spectrum of intensities in there. So I feel like all these intensities have their spot in there. So to only focus on one, I think people are missing a lot of the puzzle in this. And then in terms of like how I prescribe intensity, like context is obviously everything in terms of like what sport background are they coming to me with, what are they currently doing or have they been doing, kind of their training age, injury history, and obviously like what are the event demands that they're after and what are their strengths and weaknesses. And then it's just essentially picking what sort of, I personally, in terms of like metrics when doing intensity, I like to go more on the like pace for running or power for biking combined with RPE. I'm not a diehard like heart rate person. I just find there's a lot of limits to kind of the heart rate side of things. And what do we care about when we do a race? We care about how fast do we go and how did it actually feel while we were doing it, not what was my heart rate during that. There's no awards for who had the lowest or the highest heart rate in this stuff. It's who got to the finish line the fastest, which is why I'm not as big of a fan of heart rate stuff, but I can go deep on that stuff. But yeah, we got so many different ways to prescribe intensity, from like obviously intensifying intervals to extending them to modifying the rest. So there's lots that goes into the intensity and zone side of things.
So I want you to explain this triangle, and I think it's a good way to think about it. And you're saying CrossFit athletes come to you with an overdeveloped, I guess, top of the pyramid. So like I'm thinking about that as more top end paces, but what that's stacked on, you're saying is not as mature or as trained. Can you elaborate on, I guess, the difference between the top of the pyramid and the bottom of the pyramid?
Yeah, of course. So if we think of the bottom of the pyramid as sort of the like aerobic base, so we can think about it with the 5 zone model of like maybe our base is more of that like zone 1-2 sort of capacity. The middle of it is more that tempo threshold, and the top end is going to be more VO2 anaerobic side of things. And yeah, I think people from CrossFit come and they don't really do any endurance in their week, but they get some good top end touches. Everything from like their max lifts to those echo bike sprints to some of those like short sort of CrossFit workouts that they're doing are all actually quite good on the like VO2 anaerobic side. And a lot of the CrossFitters wouldn't have like a great VO2 max per se because they're heavy athletes. So their number doesn't actually come out very good, but like their absolute VO2 max numbers are actually like pretty good if you just look at it in terms of like without the weight involved. So I actually find it's kind of interesting when you get in there that they don't need a ton of that work because they get more touches on that side, and they're usually pretty good anaerobic. So I'm just trying to fill in usually the bottom part of that triangle to make it as wide as possible so that they can raise the width of the base and the top of the ceiling, because they'll run out of eventually top of the ceiling if they have no foundation on it. It's just kind of that thin triangle that'll eventually topple over and injure them because they don't have anything to support it.
I mean, that difference between absolute and, I don't know the other term you used, relative, is like, I am such a good example of that. I'm heavier. My absolute VO2, like just output on a machine, is just, I mean, for a long time there, I was on a machine. If there was no relative, like no running essentially, I would have qualified for the CrossFit Games, but I didn't have that relative VO2. Well, that system just wasn't as mature. It's still not, and I never got to the point where it was mature enough for me to break through and make the cross. I haven't. You're like the first person I've ever heard talk about that, and that's something I think about all the time in my head. And that's why running is the ultimate equalizer in the sport of fitness, because people like me, and there's a lot of them that are big, strong, can move a machine. That's awesome, but it's not awesome because 9 out of those 10 people simply can't run well. And that was me. That was 100% me. So ways around that is you're just saying, it's building the bottom of the pyramid, lower thresholds in a setting that's going to touch the relative demands of the sport. So essentially running that's kind of what you're hitting at?
Yeah, I like to use a combo of running and biking just because run is obviously very taxing on the body, and I think the bike and run systems are very similar to each other, and you can develop them together and like do more intensity on the bike without doing injury risk. So most of the like games type of athletes I work with, we're doing like 5 workouts a week. From the endurance side, usually it's one key run workout, one key bike workout, and then the rest are more like aerobic support type of stuff, where we're building kind of some of more of that like base side of things. But I'm touching mostly with them like zone 2, 3, 4 side of things. I don't really touch much above like second threshold, to be honest, because they get touches on that and they get maintenance and work on that I more work on zone 2, 3, 4, extending that stuff. And then I actually work on a bit of, so they're super powerful at the top end, so I do like run economy work with them so they can actually like transfer some of that top end side they have into running. So things like short strides, short hills that like build some of that elasticity through like the calf, the ankle. And then people do this for a couple weeks and they suddenly notice, wow, I'm not just dragging and like plodding along the ground here. I actually have like some pop in my step. And suddenly that's like, you get a whole downstream effect of that, and they start to feel that in their zone 3 and 4 tempos. So that's how I touch on the top end things, because we don't want to neglect it, but we can convert some of that easily through things like strides and hills at the end of easier workouts that don't have to dedicate a whole session to go doing everybody's favorite, the 10 by 400. It's like, I'm not going to invest a session like that with a CrossFit athlete. I'm going to do short strides to touch on that, and then I'm going to be able to do way more work that they can actually absorb and improve across zone 2, 3, 4.
So, I mean, the main term you just used that I thought about a lot when I was doing a lot of endurance work is you're trying to get athletes to have more pep in their step, that you feel like they can spring off. It just feels like you can spring off the ground better, that you can hold a pace better, because it almost feels like you're lighter on your feet. And from my estimation, that came from me doing, like you just said, the zone 2, 3, 4 intervals, bouts at those lower thresholds. Can you describe what intensity should feel like at those? Because we're like CrossFitters, like you probably come to learn, we're so good at, if you just give them something super hard, like we're so good at shutting off our brain and just banging our head against the wall to a point that I would argue is not conducive for making progress. So can you describe like subjective metrics that an athlete could use to know that they're in zone 2, 3, 4, like kind of the difference between that and zone 5?
Yeah, that's one thing I've learned coming over to the CrossFit side is the RPE scale I had was very different from the CrossFit side, like where I call threshold work like a 7.5 out of 10. A lot of them would take the 7.5 out of 10 and suddenly be running like 5K pace with their eyes bleeding out because they're used to like just going to the well for anything like above a 6 essentially. So yeah, I've had to modify my version to maybe modify the RP scale with, like you said, some of these subjective metrics. So the Z2 spot where I find the spot for most people with that is like you're still like moving along and you're in a pretty good rhythm, but very much like your breathing is still very much in control. I wouldn't say it's so easy that you're like having a full conversation beside you. If you're doing that, you're probably more like on that Z1, Z2 border. So I think people almost go a little too easy on some of it. Not a bad idea if you're just getting into running to make sure like you can build up some of the tissue resilience and not injure yourself, especially over the first 3 to 4 weeks. But Z2 stuff, like you're still working, you're rolling along, but again, you're not getting any like flood sort of in the muscles, not really any of that rapid breathing, maybe a slight coming in, but not much. As we move to zone 3, so that if we know the lactate model, we start to accumulate lactate a little bit quicker as we get over LT1, which is the upper end of our zone 2. So zone 3, now we're actually having to focus and start to work on this. So our breathing's becoming a little more rapid, definitely not out of control. We have to have some more focus on keeping the pace. So it's not just like you feel a little bit more of that mechanical load. But again, your legs aren't like flooding with lactate at this point. It's when we start to get towards that like threshold spot where breathing is becoming more rapid, not like to the max effort of what you're going to feel in a 5K where it's out of control. Like threshold, you're definitely taking deep breaths during this and feeling it in the legs and feeling the mechanical load takes a lot of focus, but you're not just like out there suffering, dying. So that's in my book, it's like a 7.5. For a CrossFitter, it's more like a maybe 6 out of 10. And then, like when you cross sort of that second threshold, our LT2, that lactate accumulates really quickly at that point. So then you should really feel like you're getting really rapid. You can't have any really words with people beside you, and you know it's just not sustainable. Like you get that kind of fight or flight sort of response, and you know, man, this isn't going to be sustainable for that long. And I think that is like, I know when I'm running, if I do some sort of progression workout, I can feel when I cross over LT1 and when I cross over LT2. Like I know those turn points, and they're not an exact pace or heart rate depending on the day, because I'm going to come in with different fatigue levels or different courses or conditions. Like, but I know that feeling when suddenly, okay, I've crossed over LT2, things aren't quite as easy. I got to focus. And then once I've crossed that second threshold, oh man, like now I'm in a domain now where I'm not going to have so much time to be able to spend here before my body's going to shut me down. So I think if people can start to learn those pieces, like it's such a valuable tool. And I think RPE is undervalued these days, where everybody's first thing they get is a Garmin watch and a heart rate monitor and become a slave to that right away.
Yeah, I mean, where you ended there is, I think what you said is, you know when you cross essentially into easy intensity to moderate intensity, from moderate intensity to hard intensity. You know how to do that very well. I feel you have an immense amount of experience training yourself and teaching people how to do it. I feel like I know how to do that well, similarly to you. And I think the importance of knowing how to do that is extremely high. And for CrossFitters, it's very hard because we're doing so many different modalities. We might hit the same exact piece 2 weeks in a row, but our body might be in a completely different state. The levels of fatigue in our body, whatever. Our calves might be toast from a session a couple days prior, whatever. So like that's where, whatever, if it's heart rate, if it's whatever prescription you're using, a pace, and that's why I do agree with you, your RPE is super important, because a pace is going to feel completely different depending on the buildup of fatigue and the level of recovery, whatever motor program that you're using that day. But the important part about this is how to get people to learn how to do this. And all that is, how do we teach someone to be aware of these thresholds that are so important, from easy to moderate, moderate to hard? What conversations do you have with athletes, or pieces of advice that you could give people to be more conscious of those levels of intensity?
Yeah, I think everybody obviously learns a little bit differently and kind of has that aha moment in different ways. But I think the best way people can do it is just like learn via doing. So a lot of times, like I was talking about, things like a nice progression workout where they literally start at the slowest shuffle possible and finish closer to like a 10K pace, which would be just on the upper end, just over that second threshold, and describe how they felt at each of these steps along the way. And it's totally okay to make mistakes along the way in these first ones. That's how you learn, is you burn a little too hot to the sun early and you're like, oh man, I can't do that next time. And it's like, you can learn through each of these workouts, but the biggest piece with the one-on-one coaching is I'm always hammering my athletes to give me like that subjective feedback, because they can upload their, so many of my athletes are so bad at this. They just upload the data with the pace and the heart rate, and they're like, this is what it was. I'm like, this means nothing to me if I don't know how you actually felt at each of these parts. So then when they give me that feedback and they're like, oh man, it felt like I was really grinding here, I'm like, well, that was like a low zone 3, so you're probably burning a little too hard here. On our next one, try holding it around here, either this pace, heart rate, or RPE, and let's learn from this one. And then it's just building this like data set for them of like the data combined with the RPE and data, and looking at it. And then I think they just build a sort of war chest of information that they can use when they get in a race and they're doing like a High Rocks or CrossFit event, when they're in a warehouse and they get no data from a GPS watch or a heart rate monitor, or their heart rate is totally jacked up because they're in a race environment and on 300 milligrams of caffeine, and like all you can go to in that point is RPE, and like then it's so important to have that. It's all you have in the end.
So you're just saying it's not that data's bad. You're just trying to teach athletes to integrate the data they're collecting, which is valuable, with their subjective feedback to themselves on how they're feeling. And you're trying to get them to cross-reference those points. So that's the teaching point. And that's huge.
Yeah, 100%. I'm just finding more and more like, and I love data. I will go to the ends of the earth for data. I friggin' love it. But I'm just finding more and more in this new school way of things is people come right in and get a GPS watch and a heart rate monitor, and the first thing they do is just become a slave to them, and they don't actually develop the RPE side of things, which is so important. Like when I'm running a marathon, for example, I might use my watch to look at my split through like the first mile, maybe, to make sure I didn't go out too fast, and I might check in at like the half marathon point, but I'm running a 2 hour and 40-minute marathon and looking at my watch 2 times. Like, it doesn't matter what I'm running in that. I've done enough of this work in the build up to there to know what it should feel like in different stages to perfectly execute emptying the tank by the time I get to that finish line. So it's just, yeah, you have to have that data set in there. And so many of the CrossFit athletes, why they struggle in the workouts is they haven't done that bank of data and calibrating that pace, heart rate, and RPE together to actually be able to put together a race strategy and know when they can surge and recover from it or what pace they can actually go out at and sustain it. And they just, again, have these great top ends and haven't developed the LT1 and LT2 to actually back it up and be able to operate at a high percentage of those ceilings. So that's my goal with working with most of those athletes.
So how do you advise them? Like if they have their wearable and they're starting, we'll say, a competition workout that's very monostructural based, running based, do you tell them to not look at their heart rate at all and just look at it when it's over? Zero. Do you want them to have zero information of their heart rate in the race? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I would say for somebody like inside a building like that that's doing something like that that's getting no pace feedback or heart rate, I honestly think go by RPE off that. I think you should have enough tools to be able to go out there and know that, like, hey, it's a 20-minute workout. Yeah, in the first 5 minutes I shouldn't be at max like death 10 out of 10, or I'm probably not going to sustain it for the 20 minutes and I'm going to blow up at the end. Like, it should be a progression of feeling as you go along there. So again, I don't think people should need to have to use a heart rate. And like, what if your heart rate strap's falling down on you? Or what if it doesn't connect? Or what if, again, you're just super fresh for this workout and you're also taking on caffeine and your heart rate's 10 beats higher, but the RPE feels right. Are you going to slow down? No, like you're going to use the RPE to get yourself perfectly to that finish line. So I think people being a slave to metrics too much is it's just a dangerous crutch for people to fall back on, where RPE, how you feel in that moment is super important. And again, if it's a CrossFit Games and it's the 6th workout of the weekend, like you don't know what your heart rate's going to be doing at that point in the weekend. Maybe you have caffeine battling with fatigue, like RPE is what you got, and even the pace probably doesn't even matter at that point in the weekend. You just got to expend what you can based on how you're coming in and how you want to come out of it towards your next workouts.
I mean, I've had it do me, just like looking at my heart rate. I knew enough, like from wearing it in training, that as soon as I were to look at my wrist and I were to see a number, it's like instantly I want to like feel what the data point I'm seeing. And when I'm at a competition, even if it's a monostructural short workout, doesn't matter. Workout's about to start. I haven't done anything. And my heart rate's super high just from nerves. The last thing I want going through my head is looking at my wrist, seeing something that I attribute to be bad, a high heart rate, and then just like my mindset, if I were to have done that, which I never did, I just feel like it's a slippery slope, because then you're going to lose the mindset battle before that even starts. But it's just getting to the athletes to the point of being able to understand intensity and subjective metrics.
Yeah, and there's like some great research in terms of it, like in terms of getting in that flow state you're looking for in races that everybody's always like trying to get into. And like looking at a watch all the time to look at pace and data are like surefire ways to knock you out of that, where if you're in the moment, you should be able to tell what's happening. Like, how do my muscles feel here? How is the mechanical load on myself? What is my breathing doing during this part? Like, that should tell you just as much as what the heart rate number is going to be. And it's even a better feedback tool than the heart rate itself. Like, what is actually going on around me, and be in tune with that and be in the moment with the competition and absorb all that energy coming at you versus just like checking out from that and looking at your watch to give you that validation you're looking for. Like, be in the moment.
So I have a lot of communication with a lot of coaches that coach all various levels of CrossFit. And there's this common notion that training lower thresholds, and this is like the epitome of this whole zone 2 debate that is still a debate in our space, is that their argument, and I'm going to try and explain it as best I can, their argument comes down to receive adaptations or progress from lower thresholds, you can get those same progressions and adaptations from just doing things that are really hard. That's a lot of people still believe this, that training super hard, you just get all the same benefits you do as training easy. What would you say to coaches that still believe that?
Yeah, I think it's a very narrow-minded way of looking at it just because like if you look at it there's obviously interesting research to show like zone 5 technically produces the highest adaptations, but like that zone 5 work disappears quickly if you don't maintain a lot of it. And again, if you have nothing below it to support any of that, then you're going to run into a ceiling eventually on that zone 5 side of things and not be able to build any bigger of a triangle or any taller of a triangle because you have nothing below it. So I think, yeah, to go to you're just going to the hardest antidote right away. And then also like with a lot of that zone 5 type of stuff, if that's all you're going to, like we obviously know you can only do so much work in that zone. The load is really high on it, the injury risk is super high on it. So why not, if you already have that developed pretty well, like a lot of CrossFitters do, you're actually going to benefit more from doing zone 2, 3, 4 work, that because your ceiling isn't your issue, it's filling in your LT1 and LT2 to operate at the highest percentage of that ceiling, which is the limiter for most of them. And then they just get so many benefits from working at that zone 2, 3, 4 intensity. You think of things like lactate clearance ability, the muscular endurance side of things. There's just so many benefits to a lot of that side of things that people don't, that they underestimate from just only doing top end side of things. I think they're missing a lot of the puzzle if they're not touching on those other zones. And we can just do so much solid work and recover quickly from it. So remember the lactate curve, if all we're doing is stuff above LT2, we're just producing lots of lactate and we need lots of recovery from that. And like I mentioned, the injury risk is high. Where if we're working zone 3, 4, we can do tons of work, like tons more total time of work in there. And the recovery cost usually isn't quite as bad on it because we didn't produce quite as much lactate on it. And then, yeah, zone 2 is sort of it's all the magic stuff these days, but it's more just your foundation because you can only do so much zone 3, 4, and your zone 2 is in your warm up, your cool down, your recovery, and some of those dedicated sessions. I do more a lot of these like flux type of workouts, so it might be like zone 2, 3 flux type of stuff to work above and below LT1, similar like a zone 3, 4 flux type of stuff to teach the body to recover at high intensities. And all this stuff just helps you so much when you get to an actual CrossFit comp to know how to pace and recover quickly within a workout or between workouts.
So one thing I want to talk about, this support. You've used the word supporting, like you're supporting the pyramid, you're supporting the top of the pyramid, so the wider it is at the bottom, and you keep using that word supporting, and I want to talk about that more. When I think about this, not as an endurance coach, as a CrossFitter, and when I was doing this myself, I was thinking about this in two ways, and I want to hear your opinion about the way I think about it. The support I see is being for two main reasons. One, from an energy system standpoint, just working at a lower intensity is going to allow you to use fat more. And when you work out at a high intensity, it's not necessarily true that that energy source stops. So if you can grow that energy source, you are going to have more energy supplying that top end threshold. And you can accumulate more time, like you said, at the base of the pyramid, training a system to provide energy. That's one. The bigger one, I feel like, is being able to accumulate time performing reps with exactly what you just said, or what you said earlier, with more pep in your step. When you are training at lower intensities with intermittent rest, whatever it may be, I feel like the motor programs, whether you're rowing, whether you're running, are more crisp. That those are better. The contractions that you are having at those lower intensities, I just would feel like we're better. And if I could accumulate more time, accumulating better contractions, better motor programs, because as soon as you cross over into like that zone 5, I think a lot of people don't realize it, but it absolutely happens that your movement quality starts to diminish. If it's running, your gait might start slightly to change. And the problem with that is if your gait starts to slightly change, you're starting to train something a little different. And it's still something I do think needs to be trained, but we're wanting to accumulate a significant amount of volume. And if it's running, I want to have my gait as clean, as crisp as possible for accumulating a significant amount of time. So I guess my rationale for lower intensity exercise being supportive to an overall performance when you're trying to redline is because from an energy system standpoint and from accumulating time of better movement, I guess I would say. That's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. Like metabolic efficiency and run economy are essentially the two things you're talking about. And like both of those are huge factors in the way that people are going to perform. Like when you talk about a marathoner, those are the two that it's those two plus their like durability essentially in the end that decides how fast they run, like a marathon or a half marathon. Even like 5K, it matters. Like the systems maybe a bit more because it's not as long. You're not going to get as much breakdown. But yeah, if each step costs you a little bit less than the person beside you who maybe has the same VO2 number as you, but suddenly you got a little more elasticity and cover a little more distance, or it costs you a little bit less, then you're going to beat that person almost every day of the week, unless obviously they can suddenly dig deeper than you. But again, it's I love when people are like, it's all mental, and it is when it comes to like the final sprint or final kilometer and everything, but you only get the chance to unlock that mental part if you're actually in the race before that, and that comes from doing all the training leading up to it and actually having the systems to support you through the first half and get you to that final 1K or sprint.
So, I mean, yeah, that's good insight. I mean, when I first started CrossFit, the part that was so attractive to me, I wanted to be a Navy SEAL and I couldn't do it because I was colorblind, but it was like the notion of like putting your head down and just working as hard as you possibly could. And there's a lot of people in CrossFit that do that, and it's great. Working hard is so good for you. But then like after like a few years of training and like figuring out how to progress energy systems, I realized like that ship had sailed. Like me putting my head down, beating my head against the wall does not equal better performance. And you cannot go down that line. And it's kind of the gist of this whole conversation. So what we're getting at is one thing that I was doing such an immense amount of this style of training, and I was accumulating an insane amount of time, almost not exclusively, but probably 70% of my training in the last few years was just tempo and threshold style work. And this is something that, like, I've tried to talk about it, but I don't know if I don't articulate it well, but it's something that's just still straight up absent from like so many CrossFit programs. Like, this is something that's been in the endurance world for I don't know how many decades. It just still hasn't made its way to the world of CrossFit. And that's tempo and threshold training. So I'm sure you use it, and I want to hear your thoughts on potentially why CrossFit athletes should be doing tempo threshold training. Maybe just start with what it is, I guess.
Yeah, I would say that is the like foundational secret of why I've been able to help progress so many of these CrossFit athletes as they come to me and they've always been doing this like zone 5 type of work and they already have that developed, or they're only doing combined with that like some plodding along zone 2 stuff, but the zone 3-4 is really the magic. So zone 3 is what we call like tempo essentially. I won't go off the RPE scale because the CrossFitters will blow up and go at 5K pace. But yeah, zone 3 and 4 are essentially the two spots sort of between our two thresholds. So upper zone 2 is that like LT1 aerobic threshold. Zone 3 and 4 kind of lie above that up until our kind of second threshold. And it's just an awesome spot where we can log lots of really quality work in there that is great on the metabolic side of things, on the mechanical efficiency side of things, but also be able to recover quickly from it. So an example of a threshold workout might be if you're doing something like a 1 hour run. Within it, you might have like 4 by 8 minutes at sort of a threshold intensity that you might have like 2 to 4 minutes or something easy between that. And then over the weeks, we might be looking to accumulate more time. So that was 32 minutes. We might try and get you up to 8 by 5 minutes or 4 by 10 minutes to get 40 minutes of work. So a lot of the work I'm doing with athletes is like progressive work in that zone 3 and 4 across bike and run to accumulate more and more time, and then checking in every 4 to 6 weeks, because obviously if they're progressing, maybe these sort of zone 3 and 4 numbers need to move up. So I definitely will use their feedback, and if I know it's getting too easy, I'll just bump it up myself, or we might do a fitness sort of test thing every 4 to 6 weeks. But I don't love to hammer home the fitness testing too much because, again, like you were talking about, I don't want to use all of these matches that we want to be using in our competitions in training all the time. I think you can still get what you need from challenging workouts without burying yourself, because in the endurance world anyways, I think that we usually only have maybe like 4 to 6 of these like go to the well matches like within a year, especially when you're talking like an Ironman or marathon or half marathon, and save those for the ones that matter to have your best days out there versus wasting them all in training. It's like, let's get productive training, and our goal with training is to improve fitness and not prove fitness. So that's one thing I'm always hammering home to my athletes.
Yeah, that's a good distinction. So as we've established, CrossFitters work probably overly hard, too frequently. So here's a little bit of a hypothetical for you. a significant amount of CrossFitters, doesn't matter who they are, if they go for 1 hour a day, if they train 20 hours a week, like some of the athletes that you train, I want you to speak on, you were getting at it, but I want you to talk about it more, is the volume of which athletes need to go to that zone 5 or into the well to the point where it's excruciatingly painful, where it's extremely hard, where the work is no longer sustainable. So many CrossFitters do this pretty much on any normal training day, I would argue, that they go to this place of zone 5, splits diminish, task failure. What volume of which would you say a CrossFit athlete needs to accumulate in that on like a weekly basis? Like, could a CrossFitter be super high level if they maybe didn't go to that zone 5 every week? If they went once a week, because there's so many workouts that's just, the nature of the beast, 4 times. Go, send it. Like, how often should we be going to that zone 5, that highest threshold in terms of efficiency of getting better in endurance and building our engine?
Yeah, I mean, like personally, like when I'm working with CrossFit athletes, because I know they go to that zone 5 so much and I don't have control of their CrossFit program, I pretty much don't even touch zone 5 stuff with them. Like the work I'm doing, the only time we go over LT2 is like its second threshold is like when I'm doing flux workouts that are like just above and below it. So personally, like I think it's important to touch on zone 5, but like I don't think you need to be bearing yourself like with tons of it in a week. I think you can get most of the benefits from doing zone 2, 3, 4. But again, like a lot of those short sort of CrossFit workouts or even heavy lifts are like very much on that like neuromuscular anaerobic sort of side of things. So I don't think it's bad to get touches to maintain that, but depending on if that's an area of development for them, then maybe they need to spend more time there. But personally, when they're coming to me, I know in their CrossFit programs, they're getting doses of that. So I don't feel it's my job to do that for them because they're already probably getting as much or more than they need on that side of things. So I'm going to focus on zone 2, 3, 4, where they actually need more development and it's going to help them across their whole fitness sort of triangle like we've talked about.
I want to get a better answer. I want to play the hypothetical that you are in charge of their RPE in their CrossFit Metcons, because there is a sport specific side to it that like you do need to accumulate. You are, in my estimation, people like you are or should be the loudest voice of reason in terms of time accumulated in an endurance setting. That is still in sport-specific CrossFit Metcons. And you're kind of just like, I know they're doing a lot of it. If you were in control of their efforts in those sport-specific Metcons, would you have them go to those 4-time efforts that are super hard? Would you still have them do that on a weekly basis? Because this is something like, I've talked about it some on this podcast, and I was touching those zone 5 efforts 4 time, super hard on the ground. And I was doing it every day. And I've talked about it openly that I straight up believe that was wrong and that was too much and my progress was slower, but it was an act of being self-conscious about like wanting to keep certain paces at high RPEs. I wanted to keep it like close to me, and that if I didn't, I would like feel self-conscious and I would feel like my fitness was decreasing, which I mean, it's easy for me to say, I guess, from the outside looking in, but I just don't believe you need to accumulate a significant amount of time in that zone. And I mean, I could go as far as say you could do it twice a week. And I want to hear you. I want to hear your take. If you were in control of their RPE, what would yours be? CrossFit, endurance work, everything. How hard, often would they go hard?
Yeah, I think of some of the athletes I work with who I have full autonomy of their program. So like a 5K type of racer where we need to forge some more of that top end. And like you said, we're going to it maybe twice a week. And again, they're not lying on the floor during this. There's very different like sections within zone 5. You're almost going to like a zone 6 by the sounds of it and some of that stuff. And like, sure, it's like, it can be beneficial for your fitness, but also the recovery cost on that is super high too. And like, what is your quality like the next 3 days after? Are you just having to rest after that? Like, save those matches for when it matters in your races. So even those 5K specialist type of people, I might be touching on more like 5% of their week in that. Like, and it's just across like some top end intervals, but yeah, maybe twice a week. And it probably doesn't even need to be going to max on that to get what you need from it. Again, training is just like how much solid load can we put down and absorb so that we actually get better. And like, I think if you're just going to max again, you're just trying to like prove fitness in your workouts again. And it's like save your best efforts for racing where it actually matters and you put it on the board. So those are the athletes I'm working with anyways, who are looking to compete. But I know there's people in their CrossFit gym who their day in, day out workouts is their like version of their competition. So maybe they have a different thought there. But for those people trying to build the best fitness possible and actually perform at key events, like save those matches for when it matters and stop wasting them in training is what I would say.
Yeah. I mean, I completely agree with you. It's just trying to get more people on board that we in the space of CrossFit are in this horrible situation where we're more or less just training too hard. And so what do you see happen to athletes in the endurance world, or if you've seen them happen in CrossFit? What are like common things you see with athletes or patterns that do go to that zone 5, that zone 6 too often? Like what's dysfunction that you would expect to see when people do that too much?
Yeah, I think a lot of them I see are going to crop up in like calf and hamstring injuries, especially because so many of these athletes love to go and do them on the treadmill or the track. I'm going to beat the drum of saying like people need to have way more variety in terms of the actual routes and stuff they run as well. Like go run some hills, go run outside, like run on some trails, mix it up a little bit because you'll become a better runner from that. But yeah, the people I see doing these like fast track workouts or fast treadmill intervals on the assault runner, like it ends up like calf and hamstring injuries and strains all the time. And they're like, wow, you did this one epic workout, but now you can't run for the next 3 weeks. So did it really make you that much better? Or if you had just done some solid threshold work or like a rolling aerobic run, like you probably would have been in a better spot than you are now. So it crops up there. And then from the intensity side of things, if they just invest too much on that, like I mentioned, they're going to probably be fatigued and carry that for the next couple days. And how does that affect the quality of their next couple workouts? And if you're doing like three sort of quality days in your week, you want to make sure you're getting the best bang for your buck out of those 3 versus expending. You only have so much money to spend on your week, if you want to call it. And if you're spending it all on that first session of the week, now your other 2, you're going to do those at crappier quality and come out of the week in a worse spot. So get the solid work in, stack a bunch of those weeks, and that's how you get the like proverbial snowball rolling with fitness. And then the athletes I work with who are willing to commit to that and not kill themselves in it. And it's not to say it's easy work, zone 2, 3, 4. It's like grindy type of work and you're still tested and you're like on the limit in a different way. It's just longer, but it's still tough work, but you don't get broken down as much from it. And then you can do way more work. And after 8 to 10 weeks, people notice such a huge difference. And then they're not always getting injured. And yeah, they just get way better gains long term. And then they have a bigger triangle to be able to, again, raise the roof when they need to coming up again. So their triangles aren't falling over and teetering like if they just do the top end stuff.
That's good. So how high your triangle is a function of how big the base is. That's good.
Yeah, to get your triangle even higher, at some point you're going to have to address that zone 2, 3, 4 stuff to be able to push that up again, or you're just going to run into a ceiling there, either from the physiological side or the mechanical side, where you're just not going to have like the lactate clearance and stuff like that, and you're just going to flood in the first K of your 5K when you go out hard at what you think is your VO2 ceiling, but really you're just going to fall off and fade for the next 4 kilometers after that.
So you were kind of touching on it, and I've seen it on your page a little bit. I haven't like digested all of it. Is you're like a big believer, and you just said it, is like mixing up your running paths and like doing different things. You've talked about hills. We have a significant amount of people that want to do so much of their running volume on an air runner, on these self-propelled treadmills is what they are. There's multiple models of them. What would you say to the athlete that accumulates majority of their volume on these self-propelled treadmills?
Oh man, I feel like you're just missing so many other dimensions to the fitness puzzle. I'll give you the example. I live in a very hilly area. I moved here last year. And when I first started running here, like it was so hilly and my heart rate would just get jacked up and I would be dying on these rolling hills. And now 8 months later, I can roll over these hills. My heart rate barely spikes during this stuff. I get some nice variety. I'm running on trails. I'm running faster on them than I was before for less RP. And then I'm also like out there, so I know if there's hills in my races and stuff like that, I can tackle it. If there's wind that I get, things like that, I can battle. If there's heat, I know how to adjust paces and stuff for that. So I think when you get in the real world environment, you learn a lot more skills by running outside and running on varied terrain. And the beautiful thing is now you're prepared for all of the worst, being like if you have to hit a huge hill, or if it's insanely hot out, or if it's insanely windy. And then when you get on a flat course on a perfect day and it's cool conditions, now you're suddenly just flying. Your heart rate doesn't really drift as much as it did before. Like you just have so many more dimensions to your running versus just running on this flat stuff. So one of the runs I give to a lot of my athletes, aerobic runs, is what I call like an Ethiopian easy run. And if you've read any of the books about like the Ethiopian marathoners, is these guys go out and they're will be a pack of like 20 dudes who can run like a 2-hour marathon, and they'll go out on these insanely hilly gravel routes winding through the trees. They'll give one guy a watch just so they can track the amount of time they're doing. They're not looking at pace, they're not looking at heart rate, they don't care about that. They're out there accumulating time at a certain RPE, and they just run up and down. They're running at like 7,000 or 10,000 feet of elevation gain, and they're running, they say their first 1 or 2 kilometers are like 6 or 7 minutes per kilometer. These guys can run 3 minutes per K for their marathon pace. And then they eventually warm up and maybe they're running like 5 minute per K over these rolling hills and stuff like that. But that is a staple in their plan. And then they know when they come to their specific sessions, yeah, they're going to go run it maybe on a road, a flatter route, more like their race. But like, this is such a massive tool that people miss out on to make all of their running feel easier and give themselves so many more tools. So please get off the air runner, go get some fresh air, battle the elements a bit. I know your like pace graph isn't going to be perfect, but put your ego aside and you'll be a way better runner when you get to those like race type conditions.
Maybe that's what I was missing. I didn't go on any Ethiopian style trail run, and I definitely didn't, dude. A trail run, like being a bad runner, dude, like those uphills just like floor me.
But you get better at them if you do them, so that's very quickly.
For sure. And that's maybe I'll get back into the endurance world. But like I got so many trails here that I could go use if I was like wanting to take up running, and then I got serious about that again. So like one thing I was thinking about with runners, what are common things, like again, kind of like a hypothetical, like if you are in charge of more of their program, CrossFitters, if you're in charge more of their program, what would you say are like strength exercises that you don't see CrossFitters doing enough? Like, is there anything that's glaringly obvious for you? Like, do they have weak tips? Do they have weak calves? Like, what is there a muscle group that lights your radar off?
Yeah, it's calf strains, and calves getting lit up is the biggest one for me. I just don't think, I think a lot of them do things like skipping and double enders and stuff like that, but I don't think their calves are actually strong enough to handle a lot of the running load. So that's where if you start to combine things like running these hilly routes where you get like a low impact way to develop the calves in a like strong position, combine that with, I get a lot of my athletes to do like post, especially after some of their like key runs, get them to do like this calf sort of complex. So a combo of calf and soleus, usually it's like weighted sort of calf raises or isometric type of stuff for the calf or the soleus. And I find people who do that for a couple weeks start to like bulletproof the calves on that. And then again, they're getting better energy return for that run economy side of things. They're not getting injured as much. They don't feel like they need to run super slow the next day if they're running the next day because their calves are so chewed up, so they just recover quicker from it too. But that's the glaring one I see from most CrossFit athletes. I think most of them are pretty strong across a lot of the other stuff from what I've seen anyways, but calves are the one that always crop up for me from them.
Not tibs? Do you had like any tib work? Like the Neo Toe guy made tib raises so popular. Like, do you think, I mean, and I do them sometimes and I feel like I have weak tibs. Is that something you prescribe athletes or would prescribe athletes?
Yeah, I guess I do some like sort of tib stuff too, but I would say more so I get the calf stuff, and a lot of the calf stuff when you do a lot of that like bulletproofs that lower part of the leg, that also like helps you with some more of that like dorsiflexion and stuff like that, that also sometimes helps with the tib side of things and avoiding a lot of those shin splints that people get from the tib side of things. So I think the calf raise takes care of a bunch of that. I still do some like toe raise type of stuff, but I focus more on the calf side of things, and that seems to mitigate a lot of the issues for people.
So we've established that lower intensity training is extremely conducive and essential for building your engine. And now I guess the question is just like the application, like how to go about that. Like when do we start doing harder stuff? When do we start dipping into like zone 4 more? Do we accumulate zone 2 at a certain time of the year? So like let's just say it's just for simplicity purposes, it's January, and then a CrossFitter is like, I have 10 months, which most of the time they'll come to you and they'll be like, I want to be really fit in 2 months. And it's like, dude, but for this art conversation, we'll say you have 10 months to develop someone's engine. Could you give me like some overview of like when it's going to be super easy, when it's going to be, we're going to push here? Like, how do you think about that?
Yeah, I would say I start like I'll obviously map it out from when the key event is and kind of put it backwards and then figure out obviously where they're coming from. But I'm definitely a fan of always touching on kind of that zone 3, 4, 5, no matter the time of year. Even if the zone 5 stuff just starts out more as like short hills or short strides, I think you always need to be touching on that speed, because speed is always a super important aspect of it. And especially as we're getting older, we don't want that to fizzle away. So I think speed is always something I'm touching on with my athletes. And you think of like collegiate runners or elite runners, like they're always adding strides or drills at the end of that stuff. So that always needs to stay in the program. So I usually start, and it might be a little different for a CrossFit athlete sometimes just because they do have some of that top end side of things. But a lot of times when I start with people, I like to start a little bit more polarized. So building out that means like starting with more like of the two opposite ends of the spectrum. So a lot more of the aerobic base side of things, and then that top end development. So a lot more of that sort of zone 5. So it might start out as sort of short strides, short hills, and then build into some more 5K, 10K specific work. During that time, I'm usually building out sort of that aerobic base side of things. So slowly building out the volume of that zone 2 work. And then I would say as we start to get closer and closer to races, I go more to like a pyramidal approach, which means we're still touching and maintaining some of that top end. Although CrossFitters, as we've talked about, are always touching on that anyways, probably more than they need to. So I don't need to touch too much on that side. They're getting that part filled, but then I'm going into filling the middle of that triangle with lots of progressive zone 3, 4 work. So I would say that's how I sort of progress most of the people throughout the year. So yeah, it's starting that like polarized and then finishing with a little bit more pyramidal there, and then just sort of adjusting depending on giving them some touches if we know they have a certain competition coming up that's going to have. I'll use the example like they had that 2 mile at World Fitness Project. So where Emma had her breakthrough result on that, we were barely doing, I don't think we did any K or 2 mile specific work. I gave her 1 or 2 sort of tune up workouts to allow her to calibrate sort of to what it's going to feel like and what's a like sustainable pace in those pieces, so she didn't go out way too hard or way too easy in an event like that. But I think specificity is like way overrated for people, and they go to it way too early on a lot of stuff. Where if they just build the supports on either end, calibrate with a few sort of specific ones, that they can get everything they need from that. But to touch on all the zones is definitely always important. I just am turning the dial on certain zones depending on the time of year. So definitely as we're getting to a CrossFit Games season and they know they're going to have longer workouts and have to compete a bunch, like that zone 3, 4 work is super important to that, because it's longer workouts and being able to manage lactate and be able to grind in that sort of middle zone for a little bit longer, because we already know they can grind in the zone 5 for their shorter workouts. So how can I fill in the void with all the rest of the stuff?
So how often will you have athletes do like pure sprint work? I'm talking athletes that if they're doing CrossFit or high rocks, like 100 meter, 200 meters, just like super, super fast, like almost as fast as they can go, like 90% of their full speed, just sprints. Like, do you take any of that into account? Like, how much do you program that when you're just trying to help someone build an engine, whether it's for CrossFit, whether it's for high rocks? How often do you have people just sprint?
I would say multiple times a week, like almost after the end of all like easy runs is, I call them strides, so they're not as much sprints. So the key things with these strides is they're still using their endurance form. So the same form they'd be using for something like a 5K. They're not looking like Usain Bolt truly sprinting. These are relaxed at sort of the top end of what they can efficiently run these sort of sprints, if you want to call it that. But they're not, again, they're only 100 meters. So they're not these like true by the end of that, they shouldn't be huffing and puffing and dying. They're relaxed, focusing on fast cadence and as fast as they can sustainably run during that. And what this does is now they can do, maybe they do this 2 or 3 times a week where they do 5 times 100-meter strides. Now they've accumulated like maybe 3, 4, 5 minutes of this at the end of the week that didn't cost them any actual fatigue, but now they suddenly got 5 minutes of top end running that helps their run economy and that pop immensely without causing fatigue. It's like what every single elite runner you'll see, or any collegiate program of runners, is going to be essential in all their program. And I think it's a piece that people leave out and is such a underrated aspect of getting faster. I notice such a massive difference, and my strides get faster as the weeks go along for the same effort. And all that does is have a downstream effect at all the other paces you're running. You can run them more efficiently and get a little more pop. So maybe you can roll that cadence a little bit quicker. Maybe your stride lengthens out a little bit because you're getting a little more pop off of every step. So you do that and then put on some carbon shoes and a taper for a race. Like, you can go to another couple percent level in these races if you do it the right way. And if you haven't wasted all of your chips in going to max level in training.
Yeah, a lot of people do use a lot of chips. I was doing those strides. I remember like the last couple years, I would like go for like a long run, and I'd come back and I'd do those strides, and I would be holding like my 1 mile PR theoretically. But after like a super long run, it would feel really fast, and I would just be like trying to think about keeping my gait good. And most importantly is like after going on a long run and then trying to do those strides is like matching your breathing to a cadence that was conducive. And one thing I heard a long time ago, and I would like try and do it, but I feel like it never worked. And I straight up still don't know how to breathe properly when I run. But I heard one famous coach say, he was helping an athlete, and he goes, the right way you should breathe is when you, oh no, this could be out of context, but you take a step, inhale, step, exhale, inhale, like a ladder, inhale, exhale. So I had someone, I saw that, and I was like, I need to try and do that. And I tried to do it multiple times, and like, I just don't know. So at times I'd be like, this is helping. And then other times I'd be like, this seems so silly. Like, for your breathing, is there like any cues or any way you think about it?
This is not something real runners really talk about, is how to breathe. Like, it's one of those ones that it's actually, I've seen some of the interesting research that people who think about their breathing, it actually like raises their RPE. Like, I think you need to be aware of your breathing, but I think most of us know how to breathe. And if you're like thinking about that and trying to match it to steps and things like that, like, I can tell you any of my solid runners are not thinking about their breathing. They're aware of what's happening during it, but it's a byproduct of the effort they're putting in. And to think about it and try and like I feel like CrossFitters and so many people just want to like modify everything when it comes to form, and it's like breathing is apparently not excluded from that. And even like run form is a whole nother thing I can get into. Everyone's like, how do I change my run form? It's like, look at an elite marathon. Like, half of the guys in the front pack are heel striking. It's like, what is your most efficient stride for your sort of anatomy? And then if you do the right things across being strong and mobile and running a lot and having this run economy work and develop the systems with it, your body's going to find the most efficient stride for yourself. So just wanted to hammer that home too. Like, you don't need to try and fix everything when it comes to run form. Just run and do things the right way, and you're going to trend in the right direction.
I mean, yeah, it's good for me to hear you say that, because like I always think about when I run form, and I like low key think in my head, I'm like, man, if I had good run technique, I would have been there. I would have been at the games. But I mean, I like in the gym, I think about this the same way. Like, there's a lot of athletes I'll have, and like there's a lot of coaches that are like, if someone's doing a lift and their form is a little off, and it's just kind of the way their body moves, like anatomically, I get to the point, I'm like, this is kind of what it is. This person's been doing CrossFit for 5 years. I've had a lot of conversations about them, about what they should activate, what they shouldn't do. And getting this like massive monumental change in someone once they reach a certain training age is almost just like too big of an ask. I feel like that you're not going to completely rebuild an Olympic weightlifter's clean and jerk who's been doing it for 10 years. Majority of the time, that's just not going to happen. The question is like, should you try and completely rebuild like someone's running gait? Is there ever a time when you're like, all right, we need to completely restart what you're doing? And I mean, I just feel like I agree with you. I think most of the time it's just like, work with what you have and make it as good as you can.
Yeah, there's obviously tons of like physios and stuff that are big proponents of going and getting gait stuff done, but I think the people that take care of their strength training and mobility and do the run economy work, like they're going to be totally fine in terms of the form side of things. So I don't think, unless you have the, again, similar I'm sure to weightlifting, like unless you have something that's really glaring, like the person's
Yeah.
friggin' leaning over at a 90-degree angle or leaning way back or they're waving their hands in front of their face, like unless it's glaring stuff like that, or you can tell they're carrying so much tension, like things like that, I think you can give little tips to, but to try and change somebody's like run where they're landing and things like that, I think you'll probably more likely injure them than actually make them better. Like run efficiency comes from doing more of it and doing it the right way and touching on a bunch of zones and doing your strength training, your mobility, your run economy work, and you're going to become a better runner that way and not by just trying to like game it and force it to become so.
It's good insight. Well, I mean, we covered just about everything that I feel like we needed to get out there, and you had some good opinions that definitely made me think about some things I will be thinking about. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, I think we covered lots there. Always open to chatting on more topics coming up because there's lots of hot ones in the endurance world. So.
Yeah, there are, and there's a lot of hot ones in the CrossFit world too. It's just like people are so tied. Like there's just like this rift of like what's going on in other modalities, what's going on in like academia, and then there's like CrossFit. Like there's like a lot of people don't want to like exit their bubble very much in CrossFit for what reasons I can't explain, but that's what it is.
Yeah, I study so many other sports because I think you can learn something from
Yeah,
everything. Like I love looking at like the Norwegian skiers and
yeah,
triathletes and
that's
cyclists and stuff like that because that's where I learned so much of this like zone 3, 4 sort of stuff that is so progressive and solid and helps you build such a foundation, which is why I'm such a fan of so much of it. It's great for obviously the long distance endurance sports, but clearly it's having a huge effect on some of the CrossFit athletes as well who are willing to adopt it and not just do 10 by 400 every workout.
yeah. I think you convinced them. I mean, I was fully on board, but that was like the main goal of this is to let everyone understand that lower intensity training has a place in a CrossFitters program, and I think you did a very good job of articulating that. So thank you for coming on here.
Been a pleasure.
You'll be back. See
Can't
you guys.
wait.